Ukraine's nuclear agency says Russia is using a captured nuclear power plant to store weapons and attack targets. The agency's president says hundreds of Russian troops control the Zaporizhia nuclear plant in southeastern Ukraine, which Russia took in the invasion's early weeks. He accuses Russia of using the plant as a base to shell the surrounding region. One of the alleged targets is the city of Dnipro. The Ukrainian government published this video on its Telegram channel, which it says shows a Russian strike on the city. The regional governor says 3 people were killed by Russian missiles. It's one of the latest in a series of attacks on urban areas that have killed dozens of people in recent days.
Plumes of smoke rise into the sky above Ukraine's southern city of Mykolaiv. It's been the target of Russian missile strikes in recent days, causing powerful explosions. On the ground, cars completely burnt out and covered in debris. Rescue teams continue to put out the flames and search through the rubble looking for any signs of life. This area is home to 2 of the city's biggest universities. The buildings took a direct hit, much of it destroyed and beyond repair. In the central town of Vinnytsia, hundreds of kilometers to the west and far from the front lines, residents are reeling from a Russian attack on Thursday. Many people were killed and injured.
According to updates, we understand that there were 3 rockets that hit here. Previously, experts found fragments of 3 rocket engines. 2 missiles were shot down in the Vinnytsia region by our air defense forces.
Ukrainian authorities say the strike was carried out with Russia's high-precision Caliber missile, accusing Moscow of deliberately targeting civilians, a claim Russia denies. Emergency teams comb through the rubble looking for missing loved ones. The targets here: a medical center, a concert hall, and a park where mothers would take their children. 4-year-old Lisa, who has Down syndrome, was one of the victims who lost her life. Doctors fear that her mother, who's in hospital in critical condition, won't make it if they tell her the news.
If we tell Lisa's mother now that her daughter has died, there will be no chance of her being released from hospital.
As the death toll rises and many try to come to terms with their loss in Ukraine, people are bracing for further attacks in the coming days.
And for more, let's cross over now to Kiev and DW's Nick Spicer. Nick, there are concerns over the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. What more can you tell us? What exactly is going on?
There are concerns of a Chernobyl-level scale. If you think about it, this is Europe's biggest nuclear reactor, 6 reactors at work generating electricity. There are some 500 Russian soldiers who are there, and the head of the Ukrainian Atomic Energy Agency says they are shelling cities nearby and using rocket launchers there, essentially making any kind of riposte impossible unless you want to set off a giant meltdown. Now listen, when the Russians actually moved in to the base, they shot one of the reactors with a tank shell. Nothing happened. This from the employees who work at the plant. I think we can trust them. And another shell fell on a transformer. Had that shell blown up as it was supposed to, all of the cooling systems in the nuclear power plant would have stopped and it would have gone into meltdown. So the stakes are really, really high. If the Russians are there, it's because they've been coming under all kinds of very, very targeted attack elsewhere in the country with new Western weapons.
Right, and Russia, of course, had been focusing its efforts in eastern Ukraine, but in recent days, you said, there have been reports of attacks all across the country. What's the game plan?
Yeah, it's you know, we hear about shelling of civilian buildings and gains of territory here and there, but bottom line is, since the beginning of May, the Russians have taken 5% more of Ukrainian territory. This is a war of attrition. Sometimes the Russians are firing 50,000 shells in a day. The ground that they gain is essentially destroyed and empty of its inhabitants, and the Ukrainians who have left it have made a tactical retreat. What is really changing in the past 10 days, I would say, is the arrival of these HIMARS American rocket systems, which are targeted by GPS, accurate to within 1 to 3 meters. The rockets the Russians are firing within 500 meters. What the Ukrainians are doing are targeting the Russians' ammunition depots. They tend to stockpile everything together, not spread it around as other armies do. So it's pretty easy to take out a large number of Russian artillery shells and prevent them from using those giant artillery barrages. That's what's changing, and it may be the reason why civilian targets are being struck with more regularity, it would seem. President Zelensky saying that these attacks are an act of terrorism.
And yeah, I mean, we've seen dozens of civilians died in recent days in Ukraine. Just briefly, is all of that denting morale in Ukraine?
I don't think in any way, shape or form. If anything, it steals people resolves. I mean, I've been speaking with veterans and ordinary Ukrainians, and they're all on social media. They know this stuff is happening for real. The Kremlin denies it and says it's manufactured by President Zelensky through some kind of internet magic and filmmaking. It's not true. Everybody's got a relative who's been affected. And if anything, it just makes people more and more convinced that they need to keep fighting. You've got about 95% of Ukrainians who believe victory is possible, and around that number who support their president.
All right, DW's Nick Spicer there reporting for us from Kiev. Thank you so much, Nick. Authorities in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv are changing their building codes to reflect the new reality of war. In the future, every new building will have a purpose-built bomb shelter in anticipation of many more Russian air raids and missile strikes. Lviv's chief architect showed DW's Amyan Essiev around a building that's serving as a model for future structures.
Lviv Tech City. On the outside, a normal office park. Inside, workers are preparing this structure for war. The bomb shelter is located in the parking garage. Lviv's chief architect explains which features make this shelter state-of-the-art and why he wants every new building in the city to have the same.
We understood since the start of the war that it's about basic things. It's about the possibility when building collapsed to stay and wait for the rescue. That's why we need a fresh water. It's sometimes cold inside the parking, which is at the bombing shelter at the same time. So it's impossible in the February to spend here a few hours during minus 20 degrees Celsius outside. That's why we need a separated room with the heating.
Heating, fresh water, food supplies, bathrooms with toilets and showers for those upstairs in case of an attack, and all this handicap accessible. That's what Lviv's new building codes call for.
We are ready for the next conflicts. We should be ready for the next conflicts with this kind of neighbor we have. Let's say in a few years, maybe in 10 years, nobody knows.
A grim reality is being written into Lviv's architecture, that for the foreseeable future, Ukraine will have to defend its right to exist. When construction started on this building about 2 years ago, it was built to be one of the safest buildings in the country, with one of the most modern bomb shelters, safe from any attacks from the sky in the eventuality of a war. But the architects didn't realize how soon their design would be put into practice. Even as the work is completed, families displaced from eastern Ukraine have taken up temporary residence here. It may lack the creature comforts of a home, but this modern bomb shelter has what it takes to sustain life, a priority for a country at war.